Oh, and Myra gave a testimonial for Harriet. So thank you so much. Yeah, I will say she gets rave reviews. People really find it very meaningful to spend time with her. So.
Just one quick question, Jetta. Is Phyllis okay? Because I see she didn't call in.
Oh, I called her earlier in the week with the phone number and meeting number. I was just going to step out for a minute to see if she called me, but I'll call her.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Sure.
All right. Anything else before we say a blessing on our study? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So as a reminder, we are in Leviticus chapter 26. We're up to verse 3, which is the beginning of a new parsha. It's the last parsha in the book of Leviticus, Bechukotai, and it begins with the words Im Bechukotai Telechu, if you walk according to my statutes. And then as we've seen in our preview, the whole chapter is focused on the blessings that will come from doing good and the curses that will come from not doing good. So we're exploring this concept of reward and punishment and the connection between our behavior and reward and punishment. So I do believe that we read on page 160 from Harold Kushner's work, concluding with the sentence, "The God I believe in does not send us the problem. He sends us the strength to cope with the problem." And I think we're continuing from there in the box, reward, punishment, and conscience. So I think I'll start reading while you all find that location. The whole tradition of Judaism helps us in the understanding of right and wrong that is contained in our conscience. If we want personally to believe that this means God punishes wrong and rewards goodness, we are fully within what Judaism teaches. But is all wrong punished, all goodness rewarded? What of people of whom we feel they have no conscience? Perhaps they are part of the abundant evidence that God's world is as yet very far from reaching perfection, and that God has given man the task of developing a natural conscience. Any comments on that before we move forward?
And maybe that's when we'll actually know the Messiah has come. When there's actually this natural universal conscience.
That would definitely be part of my vision of the Messianic age, would be people doing the good and right thing.
Yeah, or as Dr. King said, the long curve is towards goodness. I don't know the exact
The
quote.
arc of history.
Thank you for the extra memory there.
You're welcome. I think it's good that we share the memory we have left.
Yeah, there you go. So that was Mordechai Kaplan's definition of God, is the power that makes for salvation in the universe. So he kind of imagined God as this force for good that we can connect up to, that we can plug into. And his son-in-law, Ira Eisenstein, when he talked about God, he compared God to electricity. We can't see electricity, but we know that it exists because when we plug something in, it has a result. So he said, when people are doing good, he said it's as if they're plugged into God. So that was his analogy. So, and King, Kaplan, Eisenstein, they're all reflecting, I think, a cultural moment there let's say in the mid 20th century, after the end of World War II, when of course Kaplan was writing in the 30s before the war, when he could be forgiven for optimism about human nature. But then Eisenstein and Dr. King coming after the Holocaust, and in a moment of healing and kind of an upward arc and an upward swing, when leading into the 60s, when I think there really was culturally a hope and a sense that there could be salvation, and there could be this moment of a major shift. And in some ways that shift did happen. We just had this week the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So the beginning of an ecological movement. But I think the sad reality is that our progress as a species is one step forward and two steps back. And that the great optimism that we all felt in that moment maybe has been a little bit tempered by the experience that we've had in the late 20th and early 21st century. But all of those teachings that Barry and Terry are talking about, I think reflect that moment in time. I was born in 1956, so the weird thing for people of my particular age group is that I really came of age in the 60s. So those were my formative years, and I grew up. Hi, John and Leanna. I grew up thinking that was reality, and I didn't. It took me decades to figure out that no, that moment in time was the aberration. That's not that was not reality. But I guess we all have that in those formative years. So is there somebody who could continue for us? We're on page 160, quoting the 3rd century teacher Yanai.
I can read.
Thank you, Shelley.
Quoting the 3rd century teacher Yanai, contemporary Rabbi Robert Gordus writes, "It is not in our power fully to explain either the well-being of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous." Gordus sees the universe as a work of art, the pattern of which cannot be discerned if the spectator stands too close to the painting. He claims it is only as one moves back a distance that the blotches dissolve and the design of the artist emerges in all its fullness.
All right, so just stop there for a minute. So, I get nervous when I start to see this because, one of the apologetics for the suffering of the righteous is that we don't understand the big picture. And it sounds to me like that's where Gordus is going, that if we can't understand God's master plan, but God has a master plan that may or may not be revealed at some future point. And so I'm starting to get nervous when I'm hearing this, but let's see where he's going with it.
Gordus's point is that human beings are too close to the pattern of existence, too deeply involved in it to be able to achieve the perspective that is God's alone. As a result, we cannot fully comprehend the meaning of God's rewards or punishments, nor the reasons for our joys and sufferings. In the end, after all of our explorations and explanations, we are left face to face with the mystery of life and the choice to mold whatever we are given into blessings or curses, rewards or punishments.
All right, so I'll entertain other responses before I rant and rave about this.
That's a real historian's point of view. That's a real historian's point of view because we can't see the patterns now that in 100 years we'll be able to see.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa.
Who's got some background noise there?
I think Lisa.
Lisa was on the phone.
Oh.
So I'd like to comment on this. If we cannot fully comprehend the meaning of God's rewards and punishments or the reasons for joys and sufferings, that leaves us sort of floating out there uncertain. I mean, we need to have, it would be helpful to have some guidance along the road. And so this seems to say you give it your best shot, but you're not going to know whether you've been successful. People need to be, their actions need to be acknowledged, and it's helpful if they're labeled as good or bad. And this seems to say, good, you know, best of luck, have a great time. You're not going to know if there's if you're being rewarded or punished.
So I think there's a sense, Becca, in response to what you're saying, of faith. You know, this is why we talk about faith. If there was certainty, if there was an immediate connection between good and reward and wickedness and punishment, then people would do the good because they were guaranteed to be rewarded. I think one of the great lessons of Judaism is that God removes God's self from the immediacy of that reward and punishment in space for human choice. The essence of being human, as dictated in the Genesis stories, is the ability to choose between good and evil. And if there was an observable connection between good and reward and evil and punishment, we might all be good, and we might be living in the Messianic age, and we might prefer that to the chaos that we live with now, but it would take away our essential humanity, because we would no longer have that capability to make a choice. Our choice would be dictated by the immediacy of the reward. So I'm kind of okay with the chaos theory, as it were. When Gorda says really what it's all about, and I think that Kushner was saying the same thing, is that where the godliness and where the humanity comes in is in how we respond to what we are given. That we're not given according to our essential goodness or our essential evil, but we have the choice of how we respond. Terry, just one more second. Where I get concerned about it is this idea that everything happens for a reason. And I hear a little bit of that in what Gordis, at least what's being attributed to Gordis. This is a secondhand source telling us what he says, so we need to be sensitive about that. But you know, there's just too much that is blatantly not okay in the world for me to say, well, it's just that you don't understand with your limited perspective, and there's an overriding reason. Anyway, Terry, yeah.
I just always go back. I've never been more in sync with a concept than I am with Rami Shapiro. And his concept is that, as I understand it, at least, that everything in the world, including the bad stuff, is just there. But we have to take it all. We have to accept, in order for there to be goodness, there has to be rottenness. And we have to accept the rotten as well as the good. And I think he would probably agree with you about the idea that it's your response to it that makes the difference between a good person and a rotten person.
And this harkens back to the early cognitive psychologists who talked about the development of moral behavior
Right.
in children, which is that one of the early stages of that is, if you sneak in and take a cookie, I'm going to spank you, or some variation of that. And the point of it is that over time and repetition, the moral precept of you can't have a cookie without either asking for it, having it be given to you, or earning it in some way, expand on that however you want, that becomes an internal thought. You hear the voice in your head, oh, I shouldn't go take that cookie because daddy, mommy will spank me, versus, nah, not going to go get a cookie, period. And that's an evolutionary process or developmental process. And it sounds very much like the early us, the early Hebrews. God is saying, okay, here's what's going to happen if you go and get a cookie without permission, or some variation of that. And it makes sense from a developmental standpoint.
Yeah, that's nice.
The issue of lack of choice, or that choice isn't within our reach, feels so much like the precepts of predestination, which I've never thought of as a Jewish precept.
Yeah, it's.
I didn't follow. Could you say some more?
Well, if everything is predestined, then the choices that you make do not impact that destiny. If we as human beings, having parameters, having social structures, etc., religious structures, make choices that aren't the rules, then what does that mean in the world of you have choices, not you don't have choices? Predestination suggests that your choice is irrelevant. It's going to happen no matter what.
So here's how the Talmud puts it. All is foreseen, yet free will is given.
Take that. Take that and stuff it in your pipe.
All is foreseen, and some of you may have heard me before, so here's how I understand that. I had the conversation with a Torah Study student years ago about just this principle. And I said, yeah, it was Elliot Goldstein. And I said,
An Italian fellow.
yes, you have total free will. After services, you're going to go into the kiddush lunch, and there's going to be cheesecake and chocolate cake. And you have 100% free will of what you choose to eat. Yet, I know that you're going to choose the chocolate cake. It doesn't mitigate against your freedom of choice. You have 100% free will, but I, in the role of God, know you well enough to be able to predict that you will choose the chocolate cake. So that's kind of how the Talmud resolves the dilemma, is that all is foreseen. God knows what choices we're going to make because God knows all of the factors that are going to inform our individual free choice decision-making process, because in this understanding, God knows us in that personal, intimate way. And so God can predict what we're going to do and know what we're going to do with certainty, even though God is not controlling the choice that we make.
Probability theory.
There you go. Probability theory with maybe 100% accuracy.
Well, excuse me.
Wait, Sarah Lee wants to say something.
Does God know me so well that he knows I'm going to take a piece of both?
Could be. Absolutely.
I couldn't make that choice.
Listen, I've already told my children on my headstone, what I want as my epitaph is, you can't do it all, but you can die trying. I've been known, Sarah Lee, to order a salad in a restaurant. Could you put one dressing on half of it and one dressing on the other half? Because why should I make a decision? They both sound delicious.
No.
I have never subscribed to this theory that God gets down to the nitty gritty of what's
Right.
on my mind
Yes.
every minute of the day.
Right.
My concept is probably not big enough to accept the notion of a God that can see all whatever 100 trillion people there are on earth and know what they're going to choose off the dessert plate.
Right. So I think that's Sherry's point about predestination. Is everything, every little detail known and determined. We talked about that last week. That there are people who will say, oh, I didn't make that red light because God wanted to save me from the accident that was going to happen a block away. If I,
That's the same thing as the football players falling on their knees and thanking God for a touchdown.
Right.
I don't see that. I don't see God wasting his time on that when there are fires and I think I do believe though that a lot of the ununderstandables I can still attribute to God. This is my opinion, obviously. But because I don't understand the science of it, but the more we know about the balances of nature, I mean, I even have wonder about this virus, but not in a God sense, in a science sense. If there isn't some balance that the earth is going through, some recalibration. I mean, I look at the skies. I saw stars in my backyard last night. There are things happening that are bigger than the virus, and it's all over the world, and I don't think we understand it yet. So I don't say God did this, but I think that my ununderstanding of how God created life and created, whatever, I'm losing my train here.
Yeah, so I'm thinking as you're speaking, Terry, I have our Kabbalat Shabbat prayer book here, where we have the second paragraph of the Shema that the editors of
Right.
Tefillah, in their wisdom, removed from the liturgy. And what we have here is Zalman Schachter's translation, so it's rather a free translation of the text from Deuteronomy, but how good it will be if when you really listen to all my directions, which I give to you today for loving Adonai your God and to act godly with feeling and inspiration, your earthly needs will be met at the right time, appropriate to the season. You will reap what you've planted for your delight and health. Also, your animals will have ample feed. All of you will eat and be content. He continues, be careful, watch out. Don't let your cravings delude you. Don't let your cravings become your gods. Don't debase yourself to them, because the God sense within you will become distorted. Heaven will be shut to you. Grace will not descend. Earth will not produce. Your rushing will destroy you, and earth will not be able to recover her good balance in which God's gifts manifest. So in memory of our beloved Shel Pearson, Zichrono Livracha, that was his favorite passage. Remember, Shel, he used to quote and refer back to that text constantly. And it's very relevant to this discussion and this moment.
If we're talking about predestination, I wonder to what extent, if somebody took that very literally and to the extreme, then there could be this inclination to just be exceedingly passive in your actions and just say, I don't have to make any decisions. They've already been made for me.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to float through the world.
There's the joke that somebody mentioned last time, the classic joke about, the flood and God sends the
Right.
boat and the helicopter and, what, I don't even have, I don't even have to get in the boat or grab onto the rope from the helicopter because God will save me.
That's right. And he says, no.
Right.
God, I don't need you. God's going to save me. But that's how I felt watching those people come out of church about being They don't need protection. They don't need a mask because God will save them. They don't need to distance
What
because
about
they
the
have.
other people that they can affect? I mean, I'm supposed to
Say
be.
louder, Stan. I can't hear you.
No, what about, they were talking, but that was a selfish look at, it'll save me, but what about other people?
Yeah.
Serve God's human, human protected people who would be adversely affected by your conduct in getting the illness. Even if you don't, that's the weird, even if you get it and you're able to survive it, you can pass it on to a neighbor. Knowingly that it can be done.
Right. So the other Talmudic analogy is, you're sitting in a boat and somebody starts drilling a hole under their seat, and you schrei Gewalt, and the person says, what's it to you? I'm drilling under my own seat.
Clearly, we're all in this together. So,
We're all in the same boat here.
yeah.
I'm thinking about that, and every time something goes wrong with the boat that we have, it's like, well, why did that happen? And what is it going to take to get it fixed? Or can it be fixed?
We are all in the same boat.
The answer to that is the sea eats everything.
Yeah.
Oh,
What I said on the chats is God wanted us to pay attention to climate change. And we all did not listen. Only a few of us listened. So therefore, we now have taking care of Earth because God gave us the virus. And as far as cravings are concerned, the golden calf could be power, money. The golden calf is just symbolic of a lot of things. It's not gold, it's.
Well, Myra, I would refer you back to the section we spent quite a bit of time on Dennis Prager's commentary on idolatry. What's and understanding it much more broadly than just a little statue or figure that we bow down to. Let's see if we can move forward a little bit. Somebody want to pick up throughout the centuries?
I'll do it. Throughout the centuries, Jews have struggled to understand God's relationship to human beings. The study and practice of Torah became the means through which they sought to master ethical discipline, celebrate the seasons of existence, and unravel the deeper mysteries of life.
I think, Owen, that's what you were talking about, particularly to master ethical discipline. Yeah.
For the ancient authors of Torah, obedience to the commandments was rewarded with material and spiritual benefits. Disobedience was punished by deprivation and destruction. Some later Jewish thinkers accepted this view of reward and punishment. Others strongly disagreed. Instead, they argue it is not clear when God rewards or punishes. Perhaps it is here on earth, perhaps in heaven, maybe on both sides of existence. Should I go on?
Please.
Yeah. Still, other Jewish commentators believe that God gave the commandments to human beings for their benefit, but does not sit in heaven deciding who will suffer and who will have good fortune, who will live and who will die. Instead, the Torah's commandments help us to find strength in times of trouble and faith for the confusions and pain we endure as human beings. Our reward is in the meaning and discipline that the commandments give to our lives. There is punishment for not observing them. It derives from the loss of wisdom and potential for meaning observance may provide. One other issue concerning the choice of carrying out the commandments of Torah is also important. While the ancient rabbis identified 613 commandments in the Torah, they did not expect Jews would observe all of them or all of the rituals traced to them. Since many of the commandments have to do with sacrifices offered at the Jerusalem temple, Jewish teachers held that all Jews are exempt from such commandments until the temple was rebuilt. Furthermore, there are many cases today, as in the past, where Orthodox Jewish authorities differ in their interpretation and follow diverse practices. For example, some view the commandment, be fruitful and multiply, as a prohibition against using contraceptives. Other Orthodox Jews disagree, believing that the use of contraceptives is permitted once a husband and wife have a male and a female child. Liberal Jews, among them Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist Jews, freely choose on an individual basis which commandments they will observe. They are not bound by rabbinic authority, and they reject the idea that God punishes them because of their choices. Instead, liberal Judaism stresses the obligation of every Jew to examine the ethical teachings and ritual observances of Jewish tradition and to choose to put into practice those that will enrich the meaning of life, promote the survival of the Jewish people, and enhance its existence. The personal fulfillment derived from carrying out a commandment is its own reward.
You're doing great, Willa. Why don't you just finish it up for
I
us?
will. I had to have a drink of water. Perhaps from the time students of Torah began debating whether God actually rewards those who seek to fulfill all the commandments or punishes those who ignore them, there have been Jewish thinkers who believed that the subject was beyond human comprehension. Indeed, to this very day, the matter remains controversial. No one has the answer. We do not know why the innocent suffer, why cruelty comes into the world, and why some who are selfish have great fortune, while some who are generous endure horrors of pain. All we can do is accept the mystery of life and seek to give it meaning in our choices. It is regarding those choices that the Torah tradition can help us by asking each time we are faced with a significant decision, what would Jewish wisdom command us to do? We may increase our options for rewards and for lessons.
Thank you so much for reading that for us. Yes, so going back to liberal Jews, which we are part of the liberal Jewish community. Again, to quote Mordechai Kaplan, Kaplan said, the tradition has a vote, but not a veto. So we look to the tradition for guidance, but the challenge becomes to not use that an excuse for rejecting mitzvot, which may be hard or inconvenient. So Kaplan said, we look at the mitzvah, we study the mitzvah, we explore it, we look at how it's been meaningful to different Jewish thinkers in different periods of time, try it on, and after that kind of really deep, committed analysis, study, and practice, we find that it's completely meaningless to us, and better not to do it than to do it only for the sake of doing something by rote that has no meaning or import in our lives. But again, the flip side of that is then it becomes too easy to say, well, you know, I really like bacon, and, you know, the Pure Food and Drug Act is going to make sure that I don't get trichinosis, so why should I keep kosher? I put up in the chat, that's what I ran to get to show you this book, the concise book of mitzvot. I love this little book. It has all of the mitzvot that still apply to us today. So we referred here to the fact that, yeah, we say there are 613 commandments, but nobody ever could do all 613 commandments because some of them are agricultural, many of them are agricultural, and We were never all farmers. Many of them, as the authors suggest, had to do with temple ritual. You know, if you're not a priest, then all of those mitzvot that relate to the cycle of sacrifices and temple ritual didn't apply to us. But the Chafetz Chaim compiled in this book. So what's left for us to do? And it's a nice little compilation if you're interested in he has it divided. What are the positive commandments? What are the negative commandments that still apply for today? So if you're looking for some quarantine reading.
Yeah, would you include that in the whatever you send out?
Sure.
The title of that and the whatever.
Yes.
I think that is exactly where my mind would go, was that the odd thing to me about orthodoxy is the unwillingness to move into the present, to move out of the past, and to continue to conduct yourself as though you still live in the 1600s or in the minus 4000s or whatever.
Right, and their critique of us is don't take the mitzvot seriously, and we don't even give them a chance to. So what are the criteria here? Enrich the meaning of life. Okay, so that's very, somebody used the word selfish earlier. That's pretty selfish perspective. Is it, you know, what's in it for me? Why should I do this mitzvah? What's in it for me? But the other criterion is to promote the survival of the Jewish people and to enhance its existence. So that's a much, much more broad criterion. So what that is saying is that even if you, Terry Berman, don't find it personally meaningful, if it's good for the Jews, then you should do it anyway.
That makes sense.
But the definition of what's good for the Jews is so subjective.
Right.
It's interesting that this week in the Jewish Week in New York, there was an article by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg about how Haredi Judaism failed its followers, and talks about the pitfalls of following, getting together and things like that. And Yitz Greenberg was a modern Orthodox rabbi, very well respected. It's a very interesting article.
So he's talking specifically about the coronavirus and the situation of the moment.
Not only, he goes back a little also. It goes back to the Nazi Germany, when they said they're waiting for God to save them and they don't have to go make Aliyah. So he goes back a little in history. I thought it was a very interesting article.
Uh-huh. And it's you know, it's helpful to have a critique of orthodoxy from an Orthodox rabbi, because it's easy for all of us Reform Jews to point a finger and, well, they, and then they point the finger right back at us. But for somebody within the community, and Yitz Greenberg, his famous quote is, "I don't care what kind of Jew you are, as long as you're embarrassed about it." Just understand the pitfalls of orthodoxy and the pitfalls of non-orthodoxy, and you know, we there's plenty of imperfection to go around.
I'm proud to be a Jew.
Well, good. We're proud to have you.
She's proud to be had. That's good.
I didn't always be. When I was a child, I was ashamed.
Huh.
I think, Myra, he's talking about if you're Reform, be embarrassed about being Reform and not Orthodox enough. If you're Orthodox, be a little ashamed that you can't let go of some things.
And if you're conservative, then be ashamed about you can't make up your mind.
Yeah, I mean, you could always do what some of our congregants already do, and they have both the chocolate cake and the cheesecake, and they go to Saturday morning,
Best of both worlds.
Saturday morning and Orthodox, and Friday night in Reform.
There you go.
That's true.
Well,
There
you know,
was
it's a feast out there. Judaism is and
No
you know,
wonder
you can take a, you can, eat a lot of something or a little of this and a little of that. It's a feast out there.
That's right.
And
It's a buffet.
let's not forget the sin of denying yourself permissible pleasures.
There you go. Absolutely.
Thank you, Felix.
Would you make a list of what's permissible, please?
I refer you back to.
I'm not sure I'm clear on that.
It's permissible to laugh at ourselves.
There you go.
That's required. That's number 614.
Should be
Well, it's permissible to laugh in general. So there's a beautiful Talmudic story that Elijah the prophet returns to earth and is told that these two individuals sitting outside the city gate are for sure have already earned their seat in the world to come. And so Elijah approaches them and says, what is it that you do that is so worthy? And he says, we're jesters. We make people laugh. And that the fact that they bring levity to people's lives is what gains them entrance into the world to come. So there you go. So it's a mitzvah to
What about the one where God goes around to different groups of people and says, I have some commandments, and he gets to the Jewish people and said, how much are they? And he said, well, there's 3. I'll take 10 of them.
The midrash on that is that God goes around to different peoples and says, do you want my Torah? Well, what's in it? Thou shalt not steal. No, thank you. Do you want my 10 commandments to the next group of people? What's in it? Thou shalt not murder. No, thank you. And according to the midrash, the Israelites are assembled in the wilderness, and God lifts Mount Sinai over their heads and says, do you want my Torah? Not that it was this free choice. It was the yes came a little bit under duress.
Well, don't throw that mountain. We'll take it.
Right. Yes, certainly.
That one before.
There's something about honing in on one little thing. I saw something on the internet the other day that really I found very interesting. A teacher presented a problem to her class. She gave everybody a piece of paper, plain white paper with a black dot in the middle. And she said she wanted them to write in 15 or 20 minutes exactly what they saw and what the paper meant to them. And when she collected all the answers, everybody concentrated on that black dot. There was the black dot. But she said there are so many other things in the white that surrounds us that they ignored. And I think sometimes in life too, we concentrate on one thing to the point that we don't appreciate or understand or even try to understand what else there is.
So are you thinking about that in terms of the present discussion about mitzvot in particular, where people, so there are people who, the way I think of it is that they're like experts in a particular mitzvah. They may not observe any other mitzvah, and kashrut again comes to mind. There are people who don't have any Shabbat practice at all, but let me tell you, they go through every single ingredient of every piece of food that they eat. So yes, sometimes we can get narrowly focused on one particular mitzvah and miss the big picture of what is the goal of the mitzvot. And that's you know, when we talked about idolatry, that's making an idol out of a particular religious practice. And you know, Kaplan seems to be the man of the hour. I think I mentioned his famous quote on this theme: "The meticulous observance of ritual is always a temptation to self-righteousness."
How true.
So, oh my goodness, Shelley. Shelley, you want to read us what you wrote there?
Yeah, I was going to say something earlier on in the conversation, but we'd kind of moved on. Basically, going back to the whole issue of the folks going to church despite all warnings to the contrary right now. There's a lot of prevalent, especially in a lot of evangelical trains of thought, ideas about if I believe in Christ or Jesus or whatever, it doesn't really matter if I get sick and pass it on to somebody else. I believe in Jesus, so I'm going to heaven. So that they don't really think of things in terms of it being selfish for them to get sick, because it doesn't really matter if they do.
Shelley, my pool man was here because everything, this has been a horrible month. But the pool man was here putting in a new pump, following the new plaster, following my bankruptcy. And he said he's out and about, and we talked a little bit because he can still do his job outside. And he said to me, "I'm careful, but it's win-win for me. It's win-win." He said, "If I don't get sick, I win. And if I get sick and I die, I get to meet Jesus face to face."
Wow.
Win-win.
That is absolutely the mindset. And it's something I contend with a lot with even within my own family. So like this is a lot of what I've been hearing from people that I know and what I've been seeing. And that's why they go to church despite every last warning to the contrary, like you shouldn't do this, you're going to make people sick. It's because of that mindset.
And so they assume that other people should have the same mindset, not to be afraid of getting sick, because it's all in God's hands.
Pretty much.
And they will be rewarded. Wow.
Yeah, it goes back to if I'm remembering correctly, this idea of predestination that's real prevalent in especially Calvinist Christian circles. So like if I'm remembering, like Baptist and Anabaptist Christian teachings about like, well, I believe in God, so, or in Christ Jesus, whatever, I'm going to heaven, and anyone else that believes in this is also going to heaven, or should believe in these things and is going to heaven, so it doesn't matter. It's a very kind of selfish sort of mindset. I definitely never have agreed with it, I've always really struggled with that idea. I can't wrap my head around it at all.
Yeah.
But I know that people definitely believe that.
So, Willa, thank you for reading for us. I think we skipped the box on obligations of liberal Jews. So let's just make sure we look at that, since we consider ourselves liberal Jews. If somebody would just read what's in that box, and then we can move on from fields. Yes, Merle, thanks.
Obligations of liberal Jews. As of June 1976 meeting, the Central Conference of American Rabbis adopted a policy statement, Reform Judaism, a centenary perspective. In describing the relationship of Reform Jews to the commandments of Jewish tradition, it notes that Judaism emphasizes action rather than creed as the primary expression of a religious life. Jewish responsibilities for action, the statement continues, begin with our ethical obligations that they extend to many other aspects of Jewish living, including creating a Jewish home centered on family devotion, lifelong study, private prayer and public worship, daily religious observances, keeping the Sabbath, and the holy days, celebrating the major events of life, involvement with the synagogue and community, and other activities that promote the survival of the Jewish people and enhance its existence. Within each area of Jewish observance, Reform Jews are called upon to confront the claims of Jewish traditions, however differently perceived, and to exercise their individual autonomy, choosing and creating on the basis of commitment and knowledge.
So, so there you have it. So, yes, we get to pick and choose, but it's supposed to be on the basis of commitment and knowledge. And I think that's where we need to look at ourselves and our own community and reflect a little more deeply on how much we're coming from a place of commitment and knowledge and how much we're coming from a place of convenience.
The challenge in that is that, and I know this from, Merle and I have been active in the reform movement for a long time. The challenge has always seemed to be, how do you convince Reform Jews to continue learning, to continue being in education settings, so that, all the congregations will tell you that we struggle to keep them after their bar bat mitzvah. And so I know certainly after, decades ago, that after bar bat mitzvah, the Reform Jews created, actually they weren't doing bar bat mitzvah, they were doing confirmation to keep them there until, what was it, age 16 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And then there was like, if you could keep them that long, then you would lose them. How do you bring them back as adults? I don't know about any of the rest of you, but I have found it interesting, literally over the decades, to see congregations making the effort to re-engage adult members in study. Because when it talks about commitment and knowledge, you're not going to get knowledge by plucking it out of the air. Knowledge only comes about by continuing to study, to be in chavruta, to be in dialogue. And that's been a tremendous struggle, I believe, in all the congregations, certainly in America.
That's another interesting difference between Judaism and everything else that I know, is that concept of chavruta and of dialoguing things. It seems to me that most churches they receive a message from the pastor or the minister or whatever. And I realize I'm stupid on this subject, so correct me if I'm wrong. But they receive messages that kind of explain what they are good to go at. Their marching orders for the week, whatever. We dissect everything. It's part of the training when you do get educated young in Judaism, is you realize that there's an argument for every single point of view or every single thing that comes up, or a lack of understanding of it or something. And it's our job to tear it apart and to figure it out. I also want to say, before we're all done with the subject of mitzvot, the concept of, I'm going way back here, but the concept of predestination of things doesn't work for me so much, because so much of what we're asked to do as Jews is to go out. I guess this is the Jesus message that's gotten lost over the last 2,000 years, at least for many people, not for all Christians, certainly. But that we're asked to complete the work of creation. We're asked to help other people. We're asked to watch out for the least among us. We're asked to not glean to the edges of our field, to not be greedy to the point that we can't help somebody else stay alive and be happy. And it seems to me that if there's predestination, I don't know if that works, because I think it has to become second nature before it can be taken as a good gesture. It can't be an assigned task. It has to be something that you feel you need to do, whether it's by giving money or by doing something physical, whatever. End of sermon.
I can actually comment on your ideas about Christianity. I've come to Judaism by choice. I was raised as a Christian. The idea is you're expected to take whatever, your preacher, your priest, whatever is telling you at face value. There's not really a lot of room for individual interpretation of specific ideas, even if you don't understand them. It's like, nope, we're telling you to do this.
That's my impression. Thank you,
But
Shel.
that is very much the same as Orthodox. Whatever the rabbi says is what you do. So I don't see a specific, not Jewish aspect to that issue of thinking on your own.
Well, so I think the issue there within Orthodoxy is the difference that was referred to here, a creed, action versus a creed in the box that we just read. So within the realm of action, yes, there's a standard that may be dictated by the Rebbe and you toe the line in your action. But as far as belief goes and what you think, much more broad latitude. So you can argue about interpretation as a sport activity as long as your behavior is towing the party line. And certainly you're right, Terry, that this idea of being in conversation and dialogue as a way of learning is a fundamental Jewish approach. And it's why rarely do Jews study Torah or study Bible without many commentaries, because the dialogue and the conversation is not only with your study partner in the moment, but it's with every Jew who has ever read and looked at and thought about and tried to understand that text for thousands of years. And that's the beauty of a page of Talmud. You look at a page of Talmud and it's surrounded by commentaries, and the conversation is ongoing. And it's great. We get to be part of that conversation too. We get to have a voice also that is informed by thinkers who have gone before us and other contemporary thinkers, but also in conversation with each other. So it's one of the things that makes this so fun.
30 almost.
So with that, we're gonna wrap up.
By the way, that's why we love you, and that's why we love this group. Because you make that possible.
Excellent. I appreciate that. So we're going to pick up next week. You're going to want to find the handout from Speaking Torah, pages 310 and 311. So this is a Hasidic kind of a commentary that I thought was interesting. 310 and 311. And then there are some discussion questions on 315. So I'll put that in the email that goes out to you, so you know what. Let me just make a note to do that.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And yeah, so we'll end in just a moment with Oseh Shalom. Wish everyone a Shavua Tov. Let me put up for those who may have come late. Where is everyone? Here we go. Everyone in the meeting. I'll put that that flyer up again. We've got this new group that's starting on Thursday at 3:30. Socialize while distancing. So it's loading up here. Feel free to pop into that. We also have Wise Aging on Wednesday. So if you're interested in either of those groups, we'd love to see you.
What time is that group on Wednesday?
The Wise Aging, I think it's 1 o'clock. Let me triple check.
That we could do, Terry.
I think so too.
Aging.
Yeah.
Now, 1 o'clock on Wednesdays.
Okay. Will I see you in the as we age wisely, Jetta?
I hope so.
We sing in the morning on Wednesday.
Ah, perfect. All right.
On
Very good.
Zoom. Okay,
We try to sing.
that's right.
Oseh shalom bimroma. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Aleinu
Al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Imaru,
Amen.
Amen.
Shavua
Thank
tov.
you.
Chodesh.
Oh,
Take good care. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Well, thank you, Rabbi.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone. Have a
Bye,
good
everyone.
bye.
Robin,
Bye.
thanks for
Thank
keeping
you.
us going.
For including me.
Oh, nice to see
Sorry,
you.
I was late.
I can't find leave meeting.
I'll
bottom right-hand corner.
kick you all off the island right now. Watch this.